Knowledge management is a discipline that should be of great interest to peer support specialists because it is an approach to community and organizational development that places a premium on the same skills we value as peers: listening, empathy, storytelling, voice, equality, and teamwork. My presentation today will be short and to the point because knowledge management is a common sense approach. I'll begin with a problem statement and a definition of knowledge management, followed by an explanation of the philosophy behind it and my ideas for implementation. I will then take questions from the audience. As human beings, we have all encountered situations in which we felt our point of view was not being acknowledged or our voice was not being heard. Knowledge management has the potential to allow every member of the given community or organization to participate fully and democratically. Knowledge management addresses organizational challenges of every scale, but the problem statement upon which we will focus will be broad. Statewide communication between peers can be difficult. First of all, there's a great number of people involved, and they're geographically dispersed. The Michigan Department of Community Mental Health has always done a wonderful job of bringing people together and providing information and training. I'm sure they would be the first to agree that we all want continuous improvement. This is a multifaceted information problem. Knowledge management is a perfect approach to organizing the many moving parts that we are faced with as the leadership of this movement. Primarily, when you hear the term knowledge management, it will be in a business or information technology context. But the heart of the discipline, what it's all about, is universal. Knowledge management, in its simplest sense, is storytelling. It's an approach to community organization designed to get the whole story, not just the story of those in positions of power. Remember the game telephone that we used to play when we were kids? One person would share a story with their neighbor, and they would privately pass it on for a period of time until it was time to share and compare the message to the original. What would happen every time? The original message would get confused and sometimes lost entirely. How often have you experienced confusion or misunderstanding in your own organization? You most likely know what I'm talking about. Knowledge management puts everybody on the same page using a plan that is developed in real time from every member of the community or organization. It relies heavily on capturing that plan in a visual sense so that everyone can see the plan at any time without confusion about what it is. That sense of clarity makes participation in the organization or community that much more satisfying and invigorating to every member. Now, I don't mean to skirt the fact that knowledge management is most often considered a technical discipline. There are so many business or IT applications out there, such as SharePoint, NetMeeting, Google Docs, etc., that represent technical concepts such as CMS, content management systems, or ERP, enterprise resource planning, that we think that's all that there is. However, even though I'm going to suggest to you a technical solution today, please keep in mind that the very heart of knowledge management has very little, actually nothing to do with technology. It's about storytelling. It's about sharing, listening, and mutual respect. Knowledge management does not have to be technical at all. That's why there are so many products out there, because those developers are concerned with making money and they're missing the point entirely. This approach is people-centered. Now let's talk about the philosophy behind what is knowledge management. In any community or organization, there is a lot of unrefined data floating around, usually numbers that have no meaning without being given more context. It's like the internet without Google, just this vast quantity of formless stuff. In order to use that data in a productive way, you have to begin to group it and give it meaning. That's the reason knowledge management is usually depicted as a pyramid activity. From the vast sea of data, you begin to identify patterns of meaning and capture it as information. Narrative is one way of doing this. From all the events in your life, you can use a narrative pattern to create a story that makes sense to people. There are many types of information forms. As you move up the pyramid, the distinctions become more philosophical. What is the difference between information and knowledge? Information has more form than data, yet there's still questions about what exactly all this information means, and there's still a ton of it. Knowledge, on the other hand, is when we take that information and we process it, and we are able to use it to approximate truth. Wisdom is just a higher level familiarity with knowledge and making good choices. So I see the pyramid as a continuum, ranging from chaos to an increased understanding of truth. We never reach absolute truth because absolute truth is beyond human capability. However, we can approximate it to the closest degree possible. Let's return to the example of the childhood game telephone. That served as a perfect illustration that the more distance that exists between the source of information and the receiver of the information, the less likely that true knowledge will be cultivated. Information loses quality from point to point and makes knowledge more difficult to obtain. The example of the difference between human knowledge and absolute knowledge is demonstrated in this cartoon. Both people believe that they have true knowledge of the depth of the water, when in reality there are details or variables that they most likely have not considered from their imperfect perspective. Therefore, they both only have a piece of the truth, and therefore they have to work together to come to an understanding, a better understanding or approximation of truth. We all have an imperfect perspective. None of us are God. Knowledge management improves our ability to approximate knowledge by adding perspectives to each other to create a richer community in which everyone is properly represented. And once again, it's important to remember that not even the sum of all our perspectives can give us absolute knowledge. There is always something more. As we know, the internet has facilitated the idea that everyone should have a voice. That sense that everyone can speak and be heard is truly a democratic phenomenon. It's beautiful to behold. The problem with the internet is its sheer size and the fact that there is certainly a degree of technical expertise required to use it to meet your needs. At the end of this discussion, I'm going to present some ideas for how we could use internet communication to support the work that we do as peers. Let me give you a practical example. If you are an office worker, you have a variety of tasks to complete throughout the day. Since you develop the processes that it takes to complete those tasks, you are the expert on those processes. You are the process owner. Now let's pretend that we add a few more people to one or several of the processes. Now it's not quite so cut and dry. As part of a team, you must determine how the processes will be divided and shared and which new processes will need to be developed. Responsibility and communication become much trickier. Confusion can happen even on small teams if a plan isn't in place to manage the processes. Things can get missed or people can end up working on the same thing unintentionally, wasting effort. Many times work must be redone because someone is confused about what was meant or what was needed. It can become so complex that nobody has the whole picture anymore. The perspective you have is only an abstract of the real organization. You might not hold very much knowledge at all. These environments are very frustrating and stressful, and they happen all the time. Not necessarily in peer work environments, but in all work environments. This is very common. Now imagine that problem times 1,000 certified peers or more if you count the clients with mental illnesses. That's the challenge that faces us. In Michigan, we are blessed with some of the best services and opportunities in the nation. However, resources are limited, and there is still much that can be done. We don't have the same equipment that businesses do. Many people do not have computer training. Our infrastructure is growing but only exists to an extent. We need ways to work smarter, and knowledge management is absolutely one promising approach. In order to begin implementing the concepts we have discussed so far, it is very important that we understand the concept of tacit knowledge, because the entire field of knowledge management rests on that concept. All tacit knowledge means is the knowledge that exists in the minds of the people in the organization or the community. The problem in most groups is that not everything gets shared for a variety of reasons, and so dysfunction can occur. If we are going to be successful at knowledge management, we must develop methods of sharing everything that each member of the group knows. It isn't necessarily easy. The next thing that we need is some sort of visual representation of what we know as we know it. Internet-based solutions like intranets and extranets and social media sites like Facebook and Twitter are good for this. When we can see what has been discussed and has been decided as a group, we have a constant reminder to keep all of us working together in the same direction. There are, of course, a variety of obstacles to sharing tacit knowledge and using good visual cues. Much of our work as peers is subject to privacy restrictions, important measures used to keep our clients safe. Obviously, there is certain information that must be restricted from being shared freely. There has been a concern that if you share openly, then a supervisor might see that information and respond negatively. To build a true knowledge network, we have to build a system where honesty is rewarded, and people can feel free to speak their mind openly about how to make the entire system better. Another drawback can be competition. If peers are competing with each other for whatever reason, they are much less likely to share freely in the knowledge community for fear of losing their ideas. These are all examples of behaviors that a knowledge management community must work to address. In order to begin building our knowledge network, we must consider our sources of information. I have listed here several sources that most peers would consider vital to gaining information. In addition to our first-hand knowledge of our work environment, we get information from state training sessions, from informal social networks with other peers, from the Michigan Recovery Center for Excellence website, from peer organizations like MPSU, and now from regular Recovery Council meetings every other month if we participate in that process. Those are several outstanding sources of information. The drawback of that is that there's already quite a few moving parts separately across the state, and you can see a lot of the principles that we've already discussed start to take place. We can begin to address those issues by first dreaming big. Of course, it's ambitious to attack a large information problem with the mindset that you're going to get a large number of people operating from the same knowledge base with the same opportunity for participation and growth. However, you have to believe that it's possible and make infrastructure decisions with that belief in mind. What I'm going to do next is to conclude this presentation by sharing just a few of the knowledge management ideas that I've had using the principles that I've shared with you today. It's very important that you keep in mind that these are just my ideas and that I encourage you to have many new and different ideas of your own using these basic principles that I have shared. In fact, I will give you some time at the end to discuss your ideas with your peers and possibly present in front of the entire council. Training is where we have all entered the peer recovery movement as certified peer support specialists to be, with Ike and Larry and Gene. Training has a special place in our hearts for that reason, and even today it seems a lot of our face-to-face interaction is organized around training opportunities. Training also has shown the tremendous potential to build confidence in new peer leaders across the movement, so more and more people have been trained in different areas to share that knowledge around the state. Ask yourselves this: what would be the effect of adding an e-training module that peers could access online rather than traveling extensively and paying for lodging and food? There are pros and cons. Some of our greatest community building takes place at these training sessions. Some of our greatest growth opportunities are in the areas of training and development. There are clear pros to the ways we've been doing things that we wouldn't want to lose. But couldn't it also be argued that the money and effort saved by offering distance learning could free resources for more frequent community building activities separate from training, very much like the work that we do on the Recovery Council? And it wouldn't necessarily have to be all or nothing. We might maintain the initial certification training for esprit de corps building purposes and cut back in other areas to save resources for other advancement. These are all questions that a knowledge management addition such as e-learning could add to the discussion. A secure area for project management could make a huge difference in the way that we organize. We are currently experimenting with free options in lieu of a custom solution, options like Facebook and Google Docs. These ideas are useful as we begin to organize in smaller groups, but it would be absolutely possible for us to operate as a huge organization with all the parts working in synchronization, still with plenty of latitude for each of us to express ourselves in our own unique way. We might even install a voting tool in functionality like this and take democratic organizational principles to a whole new level. Documentation is a huge part of the visual cue element that I mentioned a few moments ago. We currently have several places where we can go to retrieve important documents, such as the State of Michigan website, the Michigan Recovery website, and several other places, but there is so much more information that exists outside of those places in small pockets around the state. It would be great to have a central place to keep track of important information and then use the project management piece to synthesize that information into community-wide knowledge as we work with concepts going forward.